My name is Madeline, and I am 33 years old. At my divorce hearing, my soon-to-be ex-husband sat radiating pure arrogance. He leaned across the polished mahogany table and sneered that I would never touch his money again. From the gallery, his young mistress smiled maliciously, loudly whispering that I did not deserve a single dime. But their smug faces turned pale with absolute terror when the judge opened my sealed letter, skimmed the contents, and burst out laughing. He looked right at my husband and quietly said, "Oh, this is good. Before I tell you what was in that letter and how I dismantled a $50 million tech empire overnight, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you love seeing arrogant people get exactly what they deserve." The air inside the downtown San Jose courthouse was heavily air-conditioned, but the tension radiating from the respondents' table made the room feel suffocating. I sat with my hands perfectly folded in my lap, maintaining a neutral expression, while Preston, my husband of 7 years, acted like he already owned the courtroom. He was wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit paid for by the company we built together. He slid a thick stack of stapled papers across the heavy wooden table, pushing it aggressively until it hit the edge of my legal pad. "Sign it," Madeline Preston demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh, mocking whisper, meant only for me and our attorneys. "You came into this marriage with a cheap suitcase, and that is exactly how you will leave." From the spectator gallery directly behind us, I heard a sharp, breathy scoff. It was Kendall Preston's 28-year-old vice president of marketing and his very public mistress. She crossed her legs, adjusting a designer handbag that cost more than my first car, a bag purchased with funds from our joint account. She leaned forward, making sure her voice carried perfectly to my ears. "She does not deserve a single dime," Kendall whispered to the empty seat beside her, completely ignoring the basic decorum of a federal family court. "She is lucky Preston even let her stay in the house this long." I did not turn around. I did not give Kendall the satisfaction of acknowledging her existence. As a forensic accountant, I had spent my entire career dealing with cold, hard facts. Emotions were a liability, and right now my absolute stillness was driving Preston insane. He thrived on reactions, on making people feel small. But today, I was a brick wall. Preston's attorney, an overpriced shark who charged $1,000 an hour, stood up and adjusted his silk tie. He addressed Judge Mitchell with the kind of condescending tone reserved for swatting away a nuisance. "Your Honor." The lawyer began gesturing vaguely in my direction. "My client, the founder and CEO of a highly successful logistics technology firm, is simply asking the court to validate the prenuptial agreement. Madeline's demands for half of this $50 million enterprise are entirely baseless. Over the past 7 years, her contributions have been limited to light clerical work. She balanced a few checkbooks from home and managed his personal receipts. That does not entitle her to the empire my client built with his own sweat, 80-hour work weeks, and unparalleled industry vision." Light clerical work. The words hung in the quiet courtroom. For 7 years, I had quietly managed the entire financial architecture of his startup. When the company was just the two of us in a cramped apartment, I was the one navigating the complex tax codes, securing early-stage funding allocations, and keeping us legally compliant, while Preston gave flashy pitches to venture capitalists. I sacrificed my own corporate auditing career to ensure his logistics platform did not collapse under its own disorganized weight. I was the invisible backbone of his success. And his reward to me was a sudden blindside divorce, the moment the company hit a $50 million valuation, immediately replacing me with a younger, flashier woman who knew nothing about the years of financial struggle we had endured. Preston looked over at me, a victorious smirk playing on his lips. He really believed his own narrative. He believed I was just the quiet, naive wife who handled the boring paperwork. Judge Mitchell peered over his reading glasses, looking down at the prenup validation request. "Does the petitioner have a response?" he asked, looking directly at me. My attorney, whom I had instructed to let me handle this specific moment, simply nodded to me. I stood up smoothly, picking up a thick, securely sealed manila envelope from my leather briefcase. I did not shout. I did not cry. I did not defend my 7 years of silent labor. Your Honor, I said, my voice echoing clearly off the high ceiling. I do not wish to contest the prenuptial agreement regarding the assets my husband currently holds. Instead, I would like to submit this evidentiary filing for the court's immediate review. I walked forward and handed the envelope to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. Preston scoffed audibly, rolling his eyes as he leaned back in his chair. "What is this, Madeline?" Preston sneered. "Some fake invoice you mocked up? You are embarrassing yourself." I ignored him, keeping my eyes fixed on the judge. Judge Mitchell broke the seal on the envelope. He pulled out the stack of documents, which carried the distinct heavy watermark of the United States Department of the Treasury. The courtroom was dead silent save for the rustling of the heavy paper. Judge Mitchell read the first page. His brow furrowed deeply. He flipped to the second page, his eyes darting quickly across the highlighted financial routing numbers and federal case files I had meticulously prepared. Suddenly, the deep frown lines on the judge's face vanished. He let out a sharp, genuine bark of laughter. It was a sound so unexpected in a divorce proceeding that Preston actually jumped in his seat. "Oh, this is good, Mr. Preston," the judge murmured, a smile spreading across his face as he looked down at my husband. "What is it, Your Honor?" Preston's lawyer demanded, suddenly losing his arrogant posture. "What has she submitted?" Judge Mitchell did not answer the lawyer. He carefully stacked the papers, aligned them on his desk, and picked up his heavy wooden gavel. The amusement in his eyes was replaced by absolute chilling authority. "Due to the severity of the federal evidence provided in this sealed affidavit, this family court proceeding is halted," Judge Mitchell announced, his voice booming with finality. "By direct order of the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service. All of your personal and corporate assets, including all international shell company holdings, are frozen effective immediately." Smack! The gavel hit the sounding block like a gunshot. Preston's smug smile instantly dissolved, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a very expensive suit. Behind him, Kendall let out a sharp gasp, dropping her designer bag to the floor with a heavy thud. The game was over, and they had not even realized they were playing. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open with a violent thud. I did not run. I walked down the long, polished marble hallway with the steady, measured pace of a woman who had spent 7 long years calculating this exact moment. Behind me, the chaotic scramble of expensive dress shoes, slapping against the hard floor, echoed loudly. Preston was coming. He caught up to me just past the security checkpoint. His large hand clamped down on my bicep, his grip hard enough to bruise the skin through the fabric of my blazer. He violently spun me around, his handsome face now contorted into an ugly, desperate mask of rage. "What kind of forged garbage did you give the judge to extort me?" he demanded, his voice a harsh, venomous hiss. "You think you can walk in there with a pile of fake federal documents and steal my company?" I looked down at the hand gripping my arm, then back up to his flushed face. For 7 years, that aggressive, domineering tone had worked flawlessly on me. Whenever I found a glaring discrepancy in the company ledgers, whenever I questioned why our early venture capital funds were being diverted to unexplained international accounts, he would use that exact voice to shut me down. He would tell me I was just a paranoid bean counter who did not understand high-level tech logistics. He had conditioned me to doubt my own brilliance. But the fear that used to paralyze me was completely gone. "Let go of my arm, Preston," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet, but it carried an authority I had never used with him before. "Or I will add assault to the extensive list of federal charges you are currently facing." Before he could process the threat, a sharp, manicured hand shoved my shoulder. Beatrice, my mother-in-law, marched up to us reeking of expensive gin and heavy gardenia perfume. She wedged herself aggressively between us, glaring at me with the absolute disgust she had harbored since the day Preston first brought me home. "Don't you dare touch my son!" she snapped, acting as if I was the one assaulting him. "You ungrateful little leech. We took you out of that pathetic middle-class neighborhood. We gave you a life of absolute luxury, and this is how you repay us." By throwing a temper tantrum in a federal court because my son finally realized he deserves a woman of his own caliber. Kendall trotted up behind Beatrice, her designer high heels clicking aggressively on the marble. She crossed her arms, looking at me with a triumphant, entitled sneer. "Preston is going to have his corporate lawyers crush you," Madeline Kendall chimed in. "You are going to be paying his legal fees for the rest of your miserable life. You should have just taken the settlement and walked away quietly." Beatrice held out her palm, her massive diamond rings catching the harsh fluorescent hallway lights. "Hand over the keys to the Porsche right now," Beatrice commanded. "My son's company pays the lease on that vehicle. You are not driving off in a $100,000 car that belongs to us. You can take the bus back to whatever cheap motel you are staying in." I looked at Beatrice, then at Kendall, and finally at Preston, who was still trying to catch his breath. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy leather-bound key fob for the Porsche Cayenne. I did not hand it to Beatrice. Instead, I tossed it directly at Kendall. She scrambled to catch it, pressing the keys against her chest like a hard-won trophy. "Take it," I told Kendall, giving her a bright, empty smile. "But you should probably know that the lease on that specific car is paid through an offshore shell company called Onyx Holdings. Coincidentally, Onyx Holdings canceled that corporate lease this morning at exactly 9 o'clock. Kendall frowned, looking down at the keys in her hands as if they were a puzzle she could not solve. "What are you talking about?" she scoffed. I kept my eyes locked directly on Preston as I delivered the final blow. Since the lease is canceled and the vehicle is no longer authorized for corporate use, the dealership automatically reported it to the authorities. The police scanner already lists those plates as stolen. If you walk out of this courthouse, get into the driver's seat, and start that engine, you will be arrested for grand theft auto before you even reach the interstate. Kendall's smug smile vanished instantly. She dropped the keys onto the marble floor as if they were physically burning her hands. The loud clatter echoed down the long, empty hallway. Beatrice opened her mouth to shout another vicious insult at me, but she froze when she turned to look at her son. Preston was not looking at the keys on the floor. He was not looking at his mother or his young mistress. He was staring at me with a look of absolute soul-crushing horror. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine, heard the mechanical click, and realized his life was over. "Onyx Holdings." Preston finally choked out, his voice trembling so badly he could barely form the syllables. "How do you know that name?" "Nobody knows that name. It does not exist on any of our domestic ledgers." The elevator behind me chimed cheerfully, and the heavy steel doors slid open. I took a step backward into the empty car, pressing the button for the ground floor lobby. I looked right into the terrified eyes of the man who thought he had outsmarted the world. The man who thought his quiet, loyal wife was far too stupid to trace the tens of millions of dollars he had stolen from our joint assets to fund his secret life. "Check your server logs, Preston," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as cracked ice. The elevator doors slid shut permanently, cutting off the sight of his panicked, gasping face. I walked out of the heavy glass doors of the courthouse and immediately crossed the busy downtown street. The California sun was blinding, but the air felt remarkably crisp. I stepped into a corner cafe, ordered a simple black coffee, and took a seat right by the floor-to-ceiling window. This was my favorite part of forensic accounting, watching the math translate into reality. A ledger never lies, and right now the numbers were about to catch up with my husband. Across the street, Preston and Kendall stormed out of the courthouse. Preston was frantically swiping at his phone, his face still that sickly shade of gray. Kendall was practically vibrating with unadulterated rage. She stomped down the concrete steps, clutching the leather key fob to the Porsche Cayenne like it was a gold medal. She completely ignored Preston, who was reaching out to grab her shoulder. She marched straight to the VIP parking zone where she had illegally parked the luxury SUV. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I watched her slide into the driver's seat. She slammed the door shut and revved the engine. The aggressive roar of the German engineering echoed all the way across the busy intersection. She peeled out of the parking space, tires squealing harshly against the asphalt. She was determined to prove to the world that she was still untouchable, still the pampered queen of Silicon Valley. I set my coffee cup down. I counted quietly under my breath. 1, 2, 3. By the time Kendall hit the second intersection, the wail of police sirens tore through the downtown traffic. It was not just one cruiser. 3 black and white police cars swerved around the corner lights, flashing brightly, completely boxing the Porsche in. Kendall slammed on the brakes, the heavy SUV jerking to a sudden halt. I watched from my perfect vantage point as 2 officers approached the vehicle with their hands resting firmly on their holstered weapons. Kendall threw the door open, shrieking at the top of her lungs. She pointed aggressively at the officers, demanding they step back. It was the exact wrong move to make when driving a vehicle that the national database had flagged as stolen by the corporate owner just 30 minutes prior. Within seconds, an officer grabbed her arm, spun her around, and slammed her against the hood of the expensive car. The sunlight caught the glint of steel handcuffs clicking securely around her wrists. Across the street, Preston had stopped dead in his tracks. He watched his mistress get shoved into the back of a police cruiser, but he did not run to help her. He was too busy staring at his phone, his thumb tapping the screen so hard I thought the glass might shatter. I left my coffee on the table, walked out of the cafe, and strolled back across the street. I wanted to hear this up close. Preston was pacing frantically near the courthouse steps, completely ignoring the stares of passing lawyers and pedestrians. He had his phone pressed hard against his ear, screaming at the top of his lungs. "Run it again," Preston yelled, his voice cracking with raw panic. "It is a platinum corporate account. It literally has no limit. Just run the card and post her bail." I stopped a few feet away, leaning casually against a concrete street lamp. I could hear the tinny voice of the bail bondsman through the phone speaker. The bondsman sounded entirely exhausted. "I am telling you, Mr. Preston, the card is declining. I tried the secondary card you gave me, and that one came back as account suspended. I cannot process the release until the funds clear our system." Preston cursed loudly, kicking the side of a heavy concrete planter. He hung up and immediately dialed another number. He was sweating profusely now. His custom-tailored suit looked rumpled and entirely out of place on a man losing his mind in public. He put the phone on speaker, holding it flat in his palm as it rang, completely uncaring who heard him. He was operating in pure primal survival mode. Marcus Preston barked the second the call connected. "Tell me you are at the office." The voice of his chief financial officer echoed from the speaker, sounding breathless and terrified. "Preston, where are you? There are federal agents in the lobby right now." "I do not care about the lobby," Preston screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I need liquidity right now. My personal accounts are frozen, and Kendall just got arrested in a stolen vehicle." "Listen to me very carefully, Marcus. Access the offshore routing numbers, move the cash from the Cayman accounts, use the Onyx Holdings liquidity, and wire $200,000 to my personal checking account right this second." I smiled, adjusting the cuff of my blazer. He was just handing me a recorded verbal confession to federal financial crimes right on the sidewalk. "I cannot do that," Marcus yelled back over the phone. "Do not tell me you cannot do it." Preston roared, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. "I drained $30 million in company operating capital into Onyx Holdings last week. I specifically moved that money so Madeline could not touch a single cent of it during the divorce discovery. That money is offshore. It is untraceable. It is untouchable. Pull it back into the main operating account right now, or you are fired." For 7 years, I had watched Preston use that exact tone to bully his employees, to bully me, and to force his way to the top. He believed that if he yelled loud enough, reality would simply bend to his will. But mathematics does not care about your volume. A forensic audit does not care about your ego. "Preston, listen to me," Marcus pleaded, his voice breaking into a high-pitched panic. "The federal agents did not just freeze our domestic accounts." "Then what happened?" Preston demanded, pacing in a tight, frantic circle. "I am trying to tell you," Marcus cried out. "I just tried to access the Onyx Holdings corporate portal to authorize the transfer. The accounts are not just frozen, Preston. The routing numbers belong to a corporate entity we do not control. Onyx Holdings changed its ultimate beneficial owner designation 3 years ago. We have a zero balance. Preston froze. The phone slipped slightly in his sweaty palm. What do you mean a zero balance? I mean the money is gone, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. The 30 million you transferred last week, the international reserves, the crypto conversions, all of it. The bank in the Caymans just informed me that Onyx Holdings legally absorbed the funds and locked out all secondary users. We do not own Onyx Holdings. Preston slowly lowered the phone. His eyes lifted from the concrete sidewalk and locked directly onto me. I was still leaning against the street lamp, completely relaxed, watching his entire world collapse in real time. I parked my modest sedan in the driveway of my parents' sprawling suburban home. The crisp autumn air smelled of wood smoke and roasted turkey. Thanksgiving was traditionally a time for gratitude and family unity, but as I walked up the manicured front steps, my stomach tightened with pure dread. I pushed open the heavy oak door carrying a pumpkin pie I had baked from scratch. I did not even get the chance to take off my coat before the shouting began. Savannah stormed into the foyer. My older sister was wearing a cashmere sweater and a pair of diamond earrings I knew for a fact cost more than my annual grocery budget. She did not offer a greeting. She did not ask how I was doing after the collapse of my marriage. Instead, she lunged forward, her perfectly manicured finger pointing directly at my face. "Are you insane?" Savannah shrieked, her voice echoing harshly off the high foyer ceiling. Preston just called me in an absolute panic. The tuition check for my kid's private school bounced this morning. He said you froze his accounts. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to get a call from the headmaster asking why my card was declined? I slowly set the pie down on the entryway table, keeping my posture perfectly straight. Preston is under federal investigation for severe financial crimes, Savannah. His accounts are frozen because he stole millions of dollars. I am not the one who wrote you a bad check. My mother marched out of the kitchen, violently wiping her hands on a decorative linen towel. She glared at me with the exact same look of deep disappointment she had given me since childhood. "We always knew you were jealous of your sisters." "Life," my mother snapped, stepping up to stand shoulder to shoulder with Savannah. "Savannah has a beautiful family, a perfect home, and she knows how to be a supportive wife. You are throwing a bitter temper tantrum because your own marriage failed. Why do you have to destroy the only successful man in this family?" I stared at the woman who raised me. The betrayal cut incredibly deep, but the forensic accountant in me simply categorized it as another piece of data. "He slept with his vice president of marketing for 2 years," I said, keeping my voice remarkably steady. "He humiliated me publicly. He tried to leave me with absolutely nothing. And you are defending him because he writes checks to fund your lavish lifestyle." My father stepped out of the den holding a crystal glass of expensive bourbon. He looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. "Preston is a provider," my father stated, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "He takes care of this family. He paid off our mortgage last year. He funds your sister's lifestyle. A smart woman learns to look the other way when a highly successful man has a minor indiscretion. But you always had to ruin everything with your stubborn pride. Now you are going to lose the divorce settlement and drag us all down with you." I braced myself for another wave of attacks, but a deep, commanding voice boomed from the top of the sweeping wooden staircase. "Back off, all of you, right now." Trey walked down the steps with heavy, deliberate strides. My brother-in-law was a towering, broad-shouldered African-American man who carried the unmistakable authority of a seasoned federal prosecutor. He walked straight past his wife Savannah and stood firmly between me and my parents like a brick wall. He looked at my family with absolute, unfiltered disgust. "Preston slept with his subordinate for 2 years," Trey said, his voice dangerously low and steady. "He brought his mistress to corporate dinners while Madeline sat at home balancing his books and building the financial models that made him a millionaire. And you want Madeline to grovel just so you can keep getting his dirty money. You want her to stay quiet so he can keep buying your loyalty. It is sickening." Savannah's face flushed crimson with rage. "Trey, stay out of this," she yelled, stepping toward her husband. "Preston is funding our daughter's college accounts. He is taking care of us while you work a rigid government job. You should be thanking him instead of defending her." Trey did not yield an inch. He looked down at his wife, his expression hardening into stone. "I prosecute white-collar criminals for a living," Savannah Trey shot back. "I do not cover for them. And I certainly do not take their handouts. I told you a year ago that Preston's money was not clean. I told you his logistics startup was burning cash too fast to justify his personal spending. But you were too busy shopping to care about where the funds were actually coming from." Savannah opened her mouth to scream another vicious insult at her husband, but the sharp, urgent chime of her smartphone cut through the heavy tension in the foyer. She angrily pulled the device out of her pocket, glaring at the screen. Instantly, her face went completely slack. The angry red flush drained entirely from her cheeks, leaving her looking as pale as a ghost. She tapped the screen frantically, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped the expensive phone onto the hardwood floor. She refreshed the application over and over again, her breathing growing fast and shallow. "Savannah," my mother asked, stepping forward with sudden genuine concern. "What is it? What is wrong?" Savannah looked up. Her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated panic. She darted her gaze from her phone to Trey, and finally she locked eyes with me. "My bank," Savannah choked out, her voice reduced to a terrified, trembling whisper. "They just sent an urgent alert. Why is my daughter's college fund account locked under a federal investigation?" The heavy silence in the foyer was broken only by the sound of Savannah's panicked, ragged breathing. My mother and father stared at the glowing phone screen in her trembling hands, completely unable to process the harsh reality crashing down around them. I did not blink. I stepped closer to my sister, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. "Preston did not give you a college fund out of the kindness of his heart, Savannah," I explained, watching her eyes widen in pure terror. "He used your 7-year-old daughter's social security number to create a dummy charity account for tax evasion. It was a textbook money laundering scheme. He needed a clean, untraceable place to park his illicit capital. And you handed him her personal information on a silver platter because you were too greedy to ask questions when he offered to pay her exorbitant private school tuition." Savannah gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. She whipped her head around to face her husband. Her desperation was palpable, completely overriding any sense of shame or accountability. "Trey, you have to fix this," she demanded, her voice bordering on a hysterical shriek. "You are a federal prosecutor. You know the judges in this district. You know the lead agents. You need to make a phone call right now and clear Preston's name. Tell them it is a massive misunderstanding. Tell them to unfreeze our accounts before we lose everything." Trey stared at his wife as if he was looking at a complete stranger. The disgust radiating from his dark eyes was absolute and unwavering. He did not move to comfort her. He simply crossed his arms over his broad chest. "I prosecute white-collar criminals," Savannah Trey said, his voice rumbling with quiet, terrifying finality. "I do not cover for them. And I certainly do not risk my career, my law license, and my freedom to protect an arrogant fraudster who used my own child to commit federal crimes. I warned you a year ago that Preston was hiding something. I told you his lavish spending did not match the company's quarterly earnings reports. But you told me I was just jealous. You told me to shut up and enjoy the perks." My father stepped forward, his face turning a mottled, furious shade of red. He was losing control of his perfectly curated family, and his pride simply could not handle it. "Now listen here, Madeline," my father barked, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger directly at my face. "You are tearing this family apart out of sheer spite. You need to call off whatever rabid dogs you unleashed on Preston and settle this divorce quietly. We are not going to let you ruin our reputation just because your marriage hit a rough patch." I reached into the leather tote bag hanging from my shoulder. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope and tossed it onto the polished entryway table right next to the pumpkin pie I had baked. The packet landed with a solid, authoritative thud. "I did not unleash anyone, Dad," I said coolly, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. "The Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation did that all on their own. And you might want to look at those papers before you try to defend your golden boy again." My mother hesitantly reached out. Her manicured fingers trembled as she pulled the thick stack of documents from the envelope. Her eyes scanned the top page and her jaw dropped. The artificial superior sneer she had worn for years vanished in an instant. "What is this?" she murmured, her voice stripped of all its usual arrogance. "Those are the fraudulent tax returns and corporate filings Preston submitted over the past 4 years," I stated. I watched the aggressive posture completely drain from my father's body as he leaned in to read over my mother's shoulder. "Take a very close look at the signature lines at the bottom of page 3. You let him manage your retirement portfolios, did you not? You gave him your social security numbers and full power of attorney because you believed he was the financial genius of the family. He did not just use Savannah's kid. He used the whole family as tax shields." My father squinted at the page and then he froze entirely. "He forged your signatures to create fictitious shell companies under your names," I continued, my voice echoing clinically in the large foyer. "He has been funneling millions of dollars in undeclared offshore assets through your personal banking routing numbers to avoid corporate audits. On paper, you and Mom are the sole proprietors of 3 fraudulent logistics firms that owe the federal government roughly $8 million in back taxes and penalties." The crystal bourbon glass slipped from my father's hand. It shattered into a dozen jagged pieces against the hardwood floor. The expensive amber liquid seeped into the Persian rug, but no one moved to clean it up. My mother covered her mouth with both hands, a choked, horrified sob escaping her throat. "If the federal government decides to pursue maximum penalties," Trey added, stepping up to stand squarely by my side, "every single person standing in this room whose name is on those documents could be facing severe prison time under federal racketeering charges. Preston did not provide for you. He set you up to take the fall." The realization hit the room like a physical shockwave. Savannah dropped her phone. My mother sank against the hallway wall, clutching her chest as if she could not breathe. My father looked at the shattered glass at his feet, the illusion of his perfect wealthy family entirely destroyed. They had sold their souls for luxury cars and country club dues, and the bill had finally come due. Before anyone could utter another word, the sound of tires screeching violently in the driveway pierced the quiet suburban neighborhood. A second later, a violent, deafening series of knocks rattled the heavy oak front door. It sounded less like a visitor and more like a police battering ram. We all jumped. The brass doorknob twisted forcefully, and the heavy door was kicked open with enough aggressive force to crack the drywall behind it. Preston burst into the family home. He was completely unhinged. His expensive silk tie was ripped away, his designer shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his eyes were bloodshot and intensely manic. He was breathing heavily, scanning the foyer like a rabid, cornered animal. Flanking him on either side were 2 massive, aggressive-looking men in sharp, dark suits. They were corporate defense lawyers, and they looked ready to tear the house down to the studs. Preston looked like he had not slept in days, though it had only been a matter of hours since he fled the downtown courthouse. His chest heaved as he pointed a shaking finger at me. Before he could scream, the taller of the 2 lawyers stepped forward. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a polite greeting. He simply reached into his sleek leather briefcase, pulled out a massive spine-bound stack of legal documents, and slammed it down onto the dining table. The heavy thud rattled the fine china and made my mother flinch violently. "We are suing you for $50 million," the lawyer stated. His voice was a flat, mechanical drone designed to intimidate. "The charges are corporate espionage, cyber terrorism, and the malicious theft of proprietary trade secrets. You illegally bypassed the security protocols of Onyx Holdings and hijacked internal corporate assets." The second lawyer stepped up, crossing his arms, attempting to physically box me into the corner of the foyer. "Decrypt the Onyx servers right now, Madeline. Hand over the new routing numbers and relinquish administrative control of the accounts. If you refuse, we will have you remanded into federal custody by midnight. You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison." Preston pushed his way between his legal muscle. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, filled with a terrifying mix of fury and sheer desperation. "Give me my money back," he roared, his voice cracking. "You think you are so smart. You think you can just press a few buttons and wipe out my entire existence. I built that company. Decrypt the damn servers before I let them destroy you." The threat hung heavy in the air, stifling the room. My parents, who had just spent the last 10 minutes realizing they were complicit in federal tax fraud, completely crumbled under the weight of the lawyer's intimidation tactics. The mere mention of a $50 million lawsuit and federal prison broke whatever tiny fragment of parental loyalty they had left. "Madeline, are you out of your mind?" my father shouted. His face was slick with terrified sweat. He grabbed my arm, trying to physically shake sense into me. "Do exactly what they say. Decrypt those servers immediately. You are not dragging this family into a massive corporate lawsuit because you are bitter about a divorce." My mother shoved her way forward, tears of pure panic streaming down her face. She grabbed the edge of the heavy lawsuit on the table as if it were a venomous snake. "Please, Madeline," she begged, her voice shrill and trembling. "Just give him his money back. We will all sign whatever non-disclosure agreements he wants. We will stay quiet. Just fix this. Do not make us go to prison because of your ridiculous vendetta." Savannah stood in the background, frantically nodding in agreement, clutching her phone to her chest. They were all so eager to throw me to the wolves, so desperate to protect their own comfortable, fraudulent lives, that they could not see the massive glaring hole in Preston's legal threat. Trey simply stood back, his arms crossed, watching me. As a federal prosecutor, he knew exactly what was about to happen. He knew a bluff when he saw one. I gently but firmly peeled my father's trembling hand off my arm. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at Savannah or Trey. I looked directly at the lead lawyer, the man who had just threatened me with life in federal prison. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. "You cannot sue an employee for corporate espionage when they do not actually work for you," I stated calmly. The lead lawyer frowned, a flicker of genuine confusion crossing his harsh features. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "You were the lead financial manager for his logistics firm for 7 years." I reached back into my leather tote bag, the same bag that held the federal indictments and the fraudulent tax returns. I pulled out a single, neatly stapled contract printed on heavy bond paper. I slid it across the smooth surface of the dining table, pushing it right over top of their $50 million lawsuit. "Read the classification clause on page 2, I instructed the lawyer. Preston stared at the document, his breath catching in his throat. He knew exactly what that contract was. 3 years ago, I explained, keeping my eyes locked on Preston's terrified face. Preston decided he was tired of paying my payroll taxes. He was tired of having me on the company health insurance plan, and he wanted to ensure I never had a legal claim to employee equity when the company eventually went public. He thought he was being a ruthless, brilliant businessman. So to save money on his tax liabilities, he officially fired me as an employee." The lawyer rapidly flipped to the second page of the contract, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. His frown deepened into a scowl of pure dread. "He fired me," I continued, my voice echoing clearly in the silent house. "And he immediately rehired me as an independent third-party forensic auditor. I have operated as a 1099 contractor for the past 36 months. I am an external entity." I took a step toward the lawyers, closing the distance, watching their arrogant postures begin to crumble. Legally, an independent forensic auditor is bound by a strict fiduciary duty to report any and all financial discrepancies directly to the federal authorities, I said. "I am mandated by federal law to flag embezzlement, money laundering, and tax evasion. If I had stayed quiet, I would have lost my license and faced criminal charges for complicity. I was not stealing trade secrets. I was not committing corporate espionage. I was simply executing the exact terms of the contract Preston forced me to sign. I was doing my job." Preston stared at the contract on the table. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of genuine panic crossed his face. But the panic was quickly swallowed by a sudden booming laugh. It was a harsh, arrogant sound that echoed through the high ceilings of the foyer. He threw his head back, his broad shoulders shaking with manufactured amusement. The two corporate lawyers beside him exchanged a quick glance, their aggressive postures relaxing as they took their cue from their client. "You really think a technicality about your employment status is going to save you?" Preston sneered, stepping closer until he was looming over the dining table. "You think handing over a few spreadsheets makes you a hero? I own the board of directors, Madeline. I handpicked every single one of those executives. I made them rich. They eat right out of the palm of my hand. My father let out a heavy sigh of relief, clearly eager to cling to Preston's projected confidence. See, Madeline? My father muttered, adjusting his collar. He has this under control. You are just making a fool of yourself. Preston slammed his hand down on the table, barely missing the pumpkin pie. They are not going to fire me, he practically spat in my face. They are going to bury your little audit. They are going to authorize an unlimited legal fund to drag you through civil litigation for the next 10 years. I will personally see to it that you never work in finance again. By the time my board is done with you, you will be begging to settle. I did not break eye contact. I did not raise my voice or defend my position. I simply reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out my smartphone. I swiped the screen, tapped a name from my recent contacts, and pressed the speakerphone button. I set the device down gently on the polished oak table right on top of his $50 million lawsuit. The line rang once. It rang twice. The tension in the room thickened, suffocating and heavy. Arthur, speaking a crisp, authoritative voice, announced through the phone's speaker. Preston froze. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. He recognized the voice immediately. It was Arthur Sterling, the chairman of the board of directors. The man Preston had just claimed was in his pocket. "Arthur, it is Madeline," I said smoothly, keeping my eyes locked on my ex-husband. "I have Preston here with me. He was just explaining how the board intends to bury my forensic audit and fund a civil lawsuit against me. I thought you might want to clarify the board's official position." A heavy, deafening silence fell over the phone line. When Arthur finally spoke, his voice was laced with pure, unfiltered rage. "Preston, you are suspended, effective immediately!" Arthur's voice boomed through the speaker, filling the silent foyer. "Do not attempt to access the corporate network. Do not attempt to enter the building. Your keycards have been deactivated, and the building security has been instructed to escort you off the premises if you show your face." Preston opened his mouth to speak, but only a dry, choked sound came out. Madeline transmitted the fully decrypted Onyx files to the entire executive board and our external legal counsel exactly 1 hour ago. Arthur continued, his tone absolutely merciless. "We have spent the last 60 minutes reviewing the transaction logs. You arrogant fool. You embezzled millions of dollars in Series B investor capital to buy a luxury penthouse in downtown Manhattan for Kendall." Savannah gasped loudly, her hands flying to her face. My mother stumbled backward, collapsing into a decorative chair in the hallway, as if her legs had completely given out. The two corporate lawyers, who just moments ago had been threatening me with life in prison, physically stepped away from Preston. They were hired to intimidate a bitter ex-wife. They were not hired to defend a CEO who had just been caught red-handed stealing from his own investors. "We are turning the entire dossier over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation," Arthur stated coldly. "The board is fully cooperating with the authorities. We are cutting all ties with you, Preston. You are on your own. Do not contact me again." The line went dead. A sharp click signaled the end of Preston's career, his wealth, and his freedom. I picked up my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. I looked at the two corporate lawyers. "As you heard," I said calmly, "your client is no longer the CEO. He does not have corporate backing, and he certainly does not have $50 million to pay your retainer. You might want to consider who is actually signing your paychecks before you threaten a federal whistleblower." The lead lawyer did not say a word. He simply reached out, grabbed his heavy leather briefcase, and walked straight out the front door. His partner followed a second later, leaving Preston standing completely alone in the center of my parents' hallway. Preston was hyperventilating. His chest heaved as he stared at the spot where my phone had been. He was completely trapped, stripped of all his power and resources. He opened his mouth to hurl another threat, but the heavy oak front door swung violently on its hinges. Kendall burst into the house. She was a complete mess. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her perfect blonde hair was tangled, and her mascara was smeared down her cheeks. She looked like she had just been interrogated for hours, frantic and terrified. She sprinted past my stunned parents and grabbed Preston by the arms. "Preston," she sobbed, her voice echoing shrilly in the foyer. The agents were at my apartment. They tore the place apart. They froze my personal checking accounts. They said I am an accessory to wire fraud. Preston stared at his mistress, his eyes wide with a terrifying manic realization. The offshore Onyx accounts were heavily encrypted. They were completely untraceable. Madeline could crack the servers, but she needed a direct paper trail linking the dark money back to his personal assets. He grabbed Kendall by the shoulders, his fingers digging into her expensive silk dress. How did they tie the Manhattan penthouse to the corporate accounts? Preston demanded, his voice shaking with absolute rage. I told you to keep that property completely off the books. I told you to use the dummy shell companies. Kendall shrunk back, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the furious man in front of her. I did not know what else to do, she stammered, her voice trembling violently. The property taxes were due. The interior decorators wanted their retainer. You told me to hide my personal spending, so I ran the penthouse maintenance fees through my corporate expense account. I expensed the luxury furniture to the marketing budget. The entire room went dead silent. Trey let out a low, humorless chuckle from the back of the hallway. Even my father closed his eyes in sheer disbelief at the sheer stupidity of the crime. Preston's face turned a dangerous, mottled shade of purple. The illusion of his criminal genius was completely shattered. He had built a massive multi-million-dollar money-laundering empire, only for his mistress to leave a direct, undeniable paper trail straight to the stolen funds by expensing her luxury furniture to the company credit card. He released her shoulders and stepped back, his hands balling into tight fists, as he turned his absolute, terrifying wrath upon her. The crisp morning air did nothing to chill the lingering adrenaline in my veins as I pulled my modest sedan into the sweeping, circular driveway of my marital home. The sprawling colonial estate sat on 2 acres of pristine Connecticut real estate. For 7 years, I had meticulously decorated every square inch of it. I had selected the imported Italian marble for the kitchen. I had planted the hydrangeas lining the wrap-around porch. I was simply here to collect my personal files and a few cherished family heirlooms. But as I stepped out of the car, I saw her. Beatrice Preston's mother stood squarely in the center of the mahogany front porch. She wore a pearl necklace and a cashmere cardigan, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. Her face was set in a mask of supreme entitled indignation. I walked up the stone steps, my heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Through the glass panels of the front door, I spotted a towering pile of Louis Vuitton luggage sitting brazenly in my foyer. It was Kendall's luggage. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it almost made me smile. Less than 12 hours after Preston had been pinned to my parents' hardwood floor by a federal prosecutor, his mother was already attempting to move his mistress into my house. "What are you doing here?" Beatrice hissed, her upper lip curling in undisguised disgust. She blocked the double doors with her body, acting as a human shield for her son's fraudulent lifestyle. "I am here to collect my personal belongings." "Beatrice," I said, keeping my voice entirely devoid of emotion. "Step aside." Beatrice let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She looked me up and down as if I were a beggar who had wandered onto her pristine property. "You are not stepping 1 foot inside this house, Madeline," she spat. "Preston posted bail at 4 in the morning. His legal team is already drafting a restraining order against you. You are trespassing. This is my son's house." I glanced at the designer bags stacked inside the hallway, and I assume Kendall is upstairs unpacking her things in my master bedroom. "Kendall is supporting the man she loves," Beatrice declared proudly, completely ignoring the fact that the woman had actively committed insider trading against her son. She understands how to stand by a successful man when he is under attack by jealous, bitter people. "He paid for this estate. He maintains it. You have absolutely no legal right to be here. Now turn around and walk away before I call the police and have you arrested for harassment." I stood on the porch, feeling the cool breeze rustle the leaves of the oak trees I had planted years ago. Beatrice had always looked down on me. She had always believed my quiet, methodical nature was a sign of weakness. She believed I was nothing more than a glorified bookkeeper, lucky enough to marry into her prestigious family. I slowly unzipped my leather tote bag. I bypassed the folders containing the IRS indictments and pulled out a single heavily embossed legal folder. I withdrew a crisp, notarized document bearing the official seal of the state registry. "Actually, Beatrice," I said, holding the document out toward her. "Preston does not own this house." Beatrice snatched the paper from my hand, her eyes scanning the text with furious disbelief. "What kind of garbage is this?" she demanded. "Preston bought this estate 5 years ago. I was at the closing." "You were at the closing," I confirmed, taking a slow step forward, forcing her to back up against the heavy wooden door. "But you clearly did not read the refinancing agreements he signed 24 months later." When Preston decided to aggressively expand Onyx Holdings, he burned through his initial venture capital in a matter of weeks. He needed cash to maintain his illusion of wealth and to keep buying Kendall expensive gifts to keep her quiet. So he secretly put the deed to this entire estate up as collateral to fund Onyx Holdings. Beatrice's face paled, but she stubbornly raised her chin. "So what? He leveraged an asset to build his corporate empire. That makes it company property. He is the CEO." "He was the CEO," I corrected smoothly. "He was suspended by the board last night." "But more importantly, Beatrice, you need to look at the name of the holding company that maintains the primary lien on this property." She squinted at the bold print at the top of the page. Her perfectly manicured fingers began to tremble. When Preston restructured the company to avoid capital gains taxes, he needed a corporate entity with zero debt to act as the primary umbrella, I explained, watching the devastating reality dawn on her face. He was too arrogant to use a traditional firm, and he wanted to keep the transaction entirely off the public books. So he transferred the deed of this house, along with the core intellectual property of the logistics software, into a newly registered limited liability company. Beatrice looked up, her eyes wide with sudden suffocating panic. "Since Onyx Holdings is a registered LLC under my maiden name," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality, "this house legally belongs to my corporation. I am the sole owner, the sole shareholder, and the sole managing director. Preston signed it all over to me because he thought I was too oblivious to understand the paperwork he forced me to process." Beatrice gasped, her hand flying to her throat as if she were choking on the crisp morning air. "You cannot do this!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is our family home. You stole this from him." "I did not steal anything, Beatrice. He handed it to me wrapped in a bow," I replied coldly. "You have exactly 30 minutes to drag Kendall's luggage out of my foyer and vacate the premises. If you or your son are still standing on this property when the clock runs out, I will call the sheriff and have you both physically removed for criminal trespassing." Beatrice let out a guttural scream of pure, unadulterated rage. She gripped the edges of the notarized deed, her knuckles turning white, and moved to rip the legal document completely in half. Before she could tear the thick paper, the heavy rumbling roar of a diesel engine echoed down the quiet suburban street. A massive, industrial-sized moving truck turned sharply into the circular driveway, its air brakes hissing loudly as it parked directly behind my sedan. The driver's side door swung open. Trey stepped out onto the driveway. He was no longer wearing his tailored prosecutor suit. He wore heavy work boots, dark jeans, and a thick jacket. In his right hand, he held a solid steel crowbar, tapping it rhythmically against his palm. From the passenger side and the rear cab, 2 towering men stepped out. They wore tactical gear and carried heavy-duty moving straps. The silver badges clipped to their belts caught the morning sunlight, identifying them as off-duty police officers. Trey looked up at the porch, locking eyes with Beatrice as he slapped the crowbar against his palm one last time. Beatrice let out a sound that was half gasp, half screech. The manicured facade she had worn for decades instantly shattered, replaced by the desperate panic of a woman losing her grip on her perceived reality. She pointed a shaking, ring-covered finger directly at Trey, her face flushing an angry, mottled crimson. "You cannot do this!" Beatrice screamed. "I know the mayor. I have dinner with the chief of police every single month. I will have your badge for this, you thug. I will call them right now and have all of you thrown in a federal holding cell." Trey did not even blink. He maintained his stance, looking at her with the mild, detached amusement of a man watching a toddler throw a tantrum. He slowly lowered the solid steel crowbar, letting the heavy end rest gently against the stone steps. With his free hand, he reached inside his thick jacket and flipped open his leather credential case. The gold federal shield caught the bright morning light gleaming with undeniable authority. "I am the federal prosecutor who just froze every single one of your son's assets," Trey stated, his voice a low, rumbling baritone that completely commanded the space. He turned his gaze to the two massive men flanking him. "Officers, this property belongs legally and solely to Madeline. These individuals have 30 minutes to vacate before they are processed for criminal trespassing." The two off-duty cops, completely unfazed by Beatrice's hysterical name-dropping, gave Trey a crisp, synchronized nod. The taller of the two officers stepped directly up to the porch, using his sheer physical size to force Beatrice to take a step backward. "You heard the man, ma'am," the officer said firmly. "You need to go inside. Pack your bags and exit the premises immediately." Beatrice's mouth opened and closed silently. The fight instantly drained out of her body as she finally realized her suburban country club connections meant absolutely nothing against a direct federal mandate. She turned on her heel and fled into the house, her cashmere cardigan slipping off her shoulder as she rushed to gather whatever dignity she had left. I did not wait for her to clear the foyer. I stepped past the off-duty officers and walked straight through my own front double doors. The entryway reeked of Kendall's cloying, overly sweet designer perfume. Her ridiculous pile of Louis Vuitton luggage was stacked aggressively against my custom wainscoting, a brazen monument to her delusion. I ignored the bags and walked deeper into the house, the familiar sharp echo of my heels on the hardwood floors grounding me in my own territory. As I passed the formal dining room, a sharp metallic clatter echoed from the back hallway leading to the sunroom. It was a distinct sound, frantic, and rushed completely out of place in the quiet morning. I altered my path, my footsteps silent on the thick hallway runner, and rounded the corner just in time to see a shadow darting toward the heavy glass patio doors. It was Kendall. She had bypassed the front door entirely, attempting to slip out quietly through the back gardens to avoid the police. She was struggling to balance her oversized handbag on her shoulder while desperately clutching a heavy midnight blue velvet sack tightly against her chest. I recognized that velvet sack instantly. It was the custom jewelry bag from the hidden wall safe in my master closet. "Going somewhere, Kendall?" I asked, my voice cutting through the quiet hallway like the crack of a whip. Kendall shrieked, spinning around so fast she nearly dropped the heavy velvet sack. Her eyes were wide, feral, and lined with yesterday's smeared makeup. She darted a look toward the glass doors and back to me, realizing instantly that she was trapped. "I was just leaving," she stammered, her voice an octave higher than usual, laced with raw panic. "Preston told me to grab his watches. I am just taking his personal things to him." "Preston does not keep his watches in a blue velvet bag," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward her, forcing her to back up against the glass. "That bag holds my grandmother's estate jewelry." The safe was locked, which means you either bullied the combination out of Preston last night, or you spent the last hour tearing my master closet apart looking for a quick payout. "You are crazy," Kendall snapped, clutching the bag even tighter to her chest, her knuckles turning bone white. "These are mine. Preston bought them for me." She made a sudden, desperate lunge for the patio door handle, hoping to force her way past me. I did not hesitate. I closed the distance between us in two rapid strides, grabbed the thick velvet drawstrings, wrapped tightly around her wrist, and yanked downward with every ounce of physical strength I possessed. Kendall let out a sharp cry of pain as the rough velvet cord burned the skin of her wrist. She lost her grip. I ripped the bag entirely out of her hands and forcefully inverted it over the hardwood floor. A cascade of brilliant, glittering wealth spilled out. Heavy diamond tennis bracelets, thick gold bangles, and long strings of flawless, iridescent pearls clattered violently against the wooden floorboards. Right in the center of the pile sat my grandmother's antique emerald choker, gleaming defiantly in the morning sunlight. It was a priceless family heirloom, and this woman had been seconds away from pawning it to fund her legal defense. Kendall stared at the scattered diamonds, her chest heaving, her face a mask of pure trapped terror. She looked up at me, opening her mouth to fabricate another pathetic, useless lie. I cut her off. "You can have my garbage husband Kendall," I said, my voice echoing coldly off the walls. "But you do not get my grandmother's diamonds." Before she could respond, heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. The second off-duty police officer rounded the corner, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. He took one look at the scattered jewelry, then looked directly at Kendall's terrified, guilty face. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" the officer asked, looking at me. "This woman was just leaving," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on Kendall's trembling frame. "Please escort her off my property and ensure she does not take a single item that does not belong to her." The officer nodded, stepping forward and firmly grasping Kendall by the upper arm. He marched her back down the hallway, her designer heels dragging against the floor as she was unceremoniously paraded past Beatrice, who was currently crying hysterically while attempting to drag 3 heavy suitcases down the front steps. I followed them out to the front porch, watching the glorious, utter dismantling of Preston's arrogant support system. Trey was leaning against the side of the massive moving truck, arms crossed, watching the 2 women struggle down the driveway toward Beatrice's luxury sedan. The neighborhood was perfectly quiet, but I could see several curtains twitching across the street. The entire wealthy subdivision was watching Beatrice and Kendall being publicly humiliatingly evicted. Trey looked at me and offered a small approving nod. The battle was won. My property was officially secured, but the morning was not over. The sharp, violent screech of tires suddenly shattered the quiet suburban air. A massive black luxury SUV came tearing around the corner of the street, the engine roaring at a reckless, dangerous speed. It did not slow down as it approached my driveway. Instead, the heavy vehicle wildly jumped the stone curb. The tires tore viciously through the manicured green grass of my front lawn, kicking up thick clumps of dirt and leaving deep muddy trenches in their wake before slamming to a violent halt just inches from the porch steps. The driver's side door flew open. Preston stumbled out. He looked absolutely destroyed. His expensive custom-tailored suit was hopelessly wrinkled and stained with sweat. His tie was gone, his shirt was ripped open at the collar, and his hair stood up in chaotic, greasy tufts. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and completely feral. He had just spent the night in a federal holding cell, stripped of his corporate power, his stolen wealth, and his dignity. He took 2 unsteady steps toward the porch, his gaze darting frantically from Trey to his mother, crying by her car to the massive moving truck, and finally to me standing victorious on the porch of the house he thought he owned. The sheer reality of his total ruination crashed down upon him all at once. His legs gave out. Right there in the middle of my ruined front lawn, the former CEO of Onyx Holdings dropped heavily to his knees in the mud, utterly and completely broken. Preston knelt in the damp soil, the knees of his bespoke Italian suit soaking up the dark brown mud. He did not look like the untouchable tech titan who had graced the cover of business magazines just 3 months prior. He looked hollowed out, a desperate man who had finally hit the bottom of a very steep drop. I stood on the top step of the porch looking down at him. I felt no pity. I felt absolutely nothing. "Madeline," he gasped, his voice ragged and hoarse from spending the night in a cold federal holding cell. "Please, you have to stop this. You have to call them off." He crawled forward a few inches, his hands sinking into the ruined grass of my front lawn. "I will give you whatever you want. Name your price. I will transfer 50% of the offshore Onyx accounts directly into your personal portfolio today. I will sign over the deed to this house free and clear. I will issue a formal public apology to you and your family in front of the entire board of directors. Just drop the IRS report. Just tell the authorities you made a mistake with the forensic audit." My mother, still hovering in the doorway behind me, let out a sharp gasp at the mention of the money. Even Beatrice stopped sobbing by her car, her ears perking up at the desperate negotiation. They all still believed that wealth could act as a shield against consequences. They believed that Preston could simply throw enough cash at the problem to make his federal crimes disappear. Preston kept talking, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic, pathetic rush. I was out of my mind, Madeline. You have no idea the kind of pressure I was under. Onyx Holdings was supposed to be a unicorn startup. The venture capitalists were breathing down my neck every single day, demanding higher profit margins, faster logistics routing, and endless growth. I had to inflate the numbers just to keep the lights on. I had to keep the investors happy, or they were going to pull their funding. He wiped a streak of sweat and dirt from his forehead, his bloodshot eyes pleading with me. And Kendall. She meant absolutely nothing to me. I swear to you. She was just a distraction. She was convenient stress relief when the board meetings got too heavy. I never loved her. I never even respected her. She was just a body to keep my mind off the crushing weight of the company. I was always going to come back to you. We can fix this. We can rebuild our marriage. A high-pitched, blood-curdling scream shattered the quiet morning air. Kendall was standing near the edge of the driveway, flanked by the off-duty police officer who had just confiscated my grandmother's diamonds. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. She lunged against the officer's firm grip, her designer heels slipping on the pavement as she thrashed wildly toward Preston. Stress relief! Kendall shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. You arrogant, disgusting pig. You promised me a ring. You promised me we were going to run New York together. I committed federal wire fraud for you. I lied to federal agents for you. I risked my entire life to hide your pathetic, sloppy accounting errors because you were too stupid to balance your own ledgers. You are nothing without me. Preston did not even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on me, silently begging for a lifeline. He genuinely believed that throwing his mistress under the bus would somehow win back my loyalty. He believed I was still the quiet, compliant wife who would sweep his messes under the rug to maintain the illusion of our perfect suburban life. I slowly walked down the stone steps, closing the distance until I was standing just a few feet away from where he knelt in the mud. I looked down at him with absolute clinical detachment. Trey stood a few feet away, leaning casually against the moving truck with his arms crossed, watching the pathetic display with the quiet satisfaction of a prosecutor who already had his airtight conviction. You really do not understand how any of this works, do you? Preston? I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the crisp air. You think you can negotiate your way out of a federal crime with stolen money? He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. I am offering you millions, Madeline. 50%. You will be set for life. I tilted my head, studying him like a fascinating, tragic exhibit. You do not understand, Preston. You cannot offer me 50% of an account that I already own 100% of. Preston froze. The desperate hope in his eyes instantly extinguished, replaced by a deep, suffocating dread. When I uncovered the offshore accounts during my forensic audit, I did not just freeze them, I explained, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. I realized that the shell companies you used to hide the embezzled funds were all registered as subsidiaries of Onyx Holdings. And since I am the sole legal owner and managing director of the Onyx Holding Corporation, I have full administrative authority over all subsidiary assets. Yesterday afternoon, while you were busy threatening me with your useless corporate lawyers, I legally routed every single penny from those offshore accounts back into a highly secure, federally monitored escrow account under my name. You have zero leverage, Preston. You are completely bankrupt. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The realization that he had absolutely nothing left to bargain with finally broke him. He slumped forward, his hands pressing into the mud as a pathetic broken sob tore from his throat. I raised my left arm and calmly checked my watch. And unfortunately, I added stepping back up onto the porch and looking down at the ruined man in my yard. I cannot cancel an IRS whistleblower report once the tactical raid has already been scheduled and authorized by a federal judge. Preston snapped his head up, his eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror. What raid? He croaked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked directly into his panicked eyes. The raid on the Onyx Holdings corporate headquarters, I replied smoothly. The Securities and Exchange Commission, along with a tactical unit from the Internal Revenue Service, were scheduled to breach the main lobby at exactly 9 o'clock this morning to secure the physical servers and arrest your remaining complicit executives. I checked my watch one last time, a cold smile finally touching the corners of my mouth. In fact, they should be at your office right now. At that exact second, 20 miles away in the heart of the financial district, the sleek glass doors of the Onyx Holdings corporate headquarters were being shattered. Dozens of federal agents wearing dark blue windbreakers with bold yellow lettering swarmed the reception area. The terrified receptionist did not even have time to reach for the panic button. Tactical teams bypassed the security turnstiles and flooded the open concept workspace. Arrogant tech developers and smug executives were ordered away from their dual monitors with sharp, uncompromising commands. Agents systematically moved through the climate-controlled server rooms, severing power cables and aggressively ripping hard drives from their metal racks. Heavy cardboard evidence boxes were rapidly filled with laptops, encrypted drives, and physical financial ledgers. Preston's entire fraudulent empire was being dismantled piece by piece, packed into cardboard boxes under the harsh glare of fluorescent office lights. Back on the manicured lawn of my estate, the crisp morning air felt incredibly still. The silence was broken only by a sharp, aggressive buzzing. Preston flinched violently. The sound was coming from the inside pocket of his ruined suit jacket. He reached in with a trembling, mud-caked hand and pulled out his phone. The screen was flashing bright red with a series of automated emergency alerts. Critical system failure. Root access seized. External override. Preston stared at the glowing letters as if they were written in a foreign language. His breath hitched in his throat. He let out a ragged, wheezing sound, clutching at his chest with his free hand. His lungs desperately fought for air as a massive panic attack took physical hold of his body. The phone slipped from his fingers, landing with a soft thud in the damp soil. He collapsed fully onto the wet grass, hyperventilating, his eyes rolling wildly toward the sky as the scope of his failure suffocated him. "Did you honestly believe I was just a naive bookkeeper, Preston?" I asked, my voice carrying the steady rhythmic cadence of a metronome. "Did you think I was just blindly plugging your fabricated numbers into a spreadsheet every month and turning a blind eye while you skimmed millions from your investors?" He managed to turn his head toward me, his face pale and slick with cold sweat. For 3 solid years, I continued pacing slowly across the edge of the porch, looking down at his pathetic, shivering form. Every single time you walked into my home office and told me to cook the books, every time you handed me a flash drive containing your altered logistics numbers, every time you ordered me to hide Kendall's bloated vice president's salary and expense her luxury lifestyle to the corporate marketing budget. I did exactly what you asked, but I also did something you lacked the intelligence to anticipate. I stopped at the top of the stairs, clasping my hands lightly in front of me. I built a shadow ledger. I took your real, unedited financial transactions and ran them through an immutable blockchain protocol. Every stolen dollar, every illegal wire transfer, every instance of securities fraud was instantly and cryptographically secured. You could not alter it, you could not delete it, and most importantly, you could not hide it. Preston let out a weak, strangled groan, pressing his forehead directly into the mud. I engineered the system to automatically duplicate that blockchain ledger and transmit it directly to a secure encrypted federal vault. Every Friday at midnight, I revealed, letting the absolute magnitude of his failure wash over him. I did not just audit your company, Preston. I built a digital cage around you, and you happily walked right into it, completely blind to the fact that I was handing the key directly to the federal government. Trey let out a low whistle of genuine professional appreciation. The 2 off-duty police officers exchanged impressed glances. Even Beatrice, who had been aggressively sobbing near her car, fell entirely silent, finally comprehending the sheer terrifying scale of the trap I had constructed. Preston had thought he was a corporate mastermind, a visionary untouchable by the law. In reality, he was nothing more than a lab rat in an experiment I had been running for 36 months. He tried to push himself up on his hands, his knuckles white with strain, but his arms gave out. He was completely paralyzed by the realization that his entire life was over. There was no loophole. There was no high-priced defense attorney who could argue against 3 years of cryptographically secured, immutable federal evidence. The quiet devastation of the moment was suddenly shattered by the aggressive roar of another high-performance engine. A pristine white Range Rover violently swerved into my driveway, the tires shrieking against the pavement as it fishtailed wildly. The heavy SUV narrowly missed colliding with the rear bumper of the moving truck before slamming to a halt. The driver's side door flew open with reckless force. Savannah practically fell out of the elevated cabin. My sister was in a state of absolute unhinged hysteria. Her perfect blowout was a tangled mess. Her designer sunglasses were pushed askew on her forehead, and thick streaks of black mascara ran down her cheeks, ruining her flawless makeup. She did not even register Preston kneeling in the mud or Trey standing nearby with a crowbar. She sprinted up the driveway, wildly waving her smartphone in the air like a weapon. Madeline Savannah screamed, her voice shrill and desperate, completely devoid of her usual patronizing tone. "You have to fix this right now. You have to call them and stop this." I looked at my sister, my expression unchanging. "Stop what, Savannah?" "My accounts!" She sobbed hysterically, stomping her foot on the stone walkway. "I just went to pay my country club dues and my card was declined." I checked my banking app. Every single one of my accounts is locked. The bank told me the federal government has placed a hard freeze on all my assets pending a criminal investigation into Onyx Holdings. She pointed an accusatory shaking finger at me, tears streaming down her face. "You have to call the IRS and tell them I have nothing to do with this. You have to save my money right now." Savannah abandoned her pristine white Range Rover, leaving the driver's side door swinging wide open against the morning breeze, and scrambled up the ruined, muddy lawn. Her designer shoes sank deep into the tire trenches Preston had just carved into the grass, but she did not seem to care. Her perfect blowout was a tangled disaster. Her oversized sunglasses were pushed askew on her forehead, and thick, ugly streaks of black mascara ran down her cheeks, completely ruining her flawless, highly curated aesthetic. She ignored Preston entirely, stepping right past his kneeling, broken form in the dirt. She ignored the towering moving truck. She ignored the federal agents. Her wild, panicked eyes were locked entirely on me. She lunged forward with the chaotic energy of a cornered animal. Her manicured hands hooked aggressively into the lapels of my coat. She tried to shake me, her breath coming in ragged, hyperventilating gasps, but I simply planted my feet and stood my ground, staring back at her with absolute zero empathy. Trey packed his bags. Savannah screamed, her voice echoing violently off the brick facade of my estate. "He is leaving me because of the tax fraud. You ruined my marriage, Madeline. You ruined my entire life over your petty jealousy." Before I could reach up and pry her clawing hands off my jacket, a large, heavy hand clamped down hard on Savannah's shoulder. Trey pulled her back with a swift, definitive motion, forcing her to stumble backward and release my coat. Savannah spun around, her mouth opening to screech at whichever officer had dared to lay a hand on her, but the sound instantly died in her throat. She finally looked at the towering man standing right next to me. She took in the heavy work boots, the dark denim jeans, the thick tactical jacket, and the gleaming gold federal shield clipped prominently to his belt. Her jaw dropped open. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale under her smeared makeup. Trey looked down at his wife. His expression was not angry. It was not sad. It was utterly terrifyingly cold. "I am leaving you because you knew Preston was using your child to wash money," Trey stated, his baritone voice slicing cleanly through the crisp air. "And you did not care as long as you got to go to Aspen every winter." Savannah physically recoiled as if she had been slapped. "Trey," she gasped, her eyes darting frantically between him and me, struggling to process the impossible image of her husband standing shoulder to shoulder with her sister. "What are you doing here? Why are you with her?" "I am the lead federal prosecutor on the Onyx Holdings embezzlement case," Savannah Trey replied, his voice completely devoid of the warmth he used to reserve for her. "I have spent the last 6 months working directly with Madeline to trace the offshore accounts. Do you want to know what the hardest part of this investigation was? It was sitting at my desk watching forensic accountants trace millions of stolen corporate dollars into an LLC registered under our 4-year-old son's name." Savannah clamped her hands tightly over her ears, shaking her head violently from side to side. "No, no, no. Preston said it was just a tax shelter." She pointed a desperate finger at Preston, who was still paralyzed in the mud. "He said everyone does it. He told me it was a standard family trust fund. He used our son to commit federal wire fraud." Trey countered, his voice rising slightly, the rigid professional control finally slipping just enough to reveal the absolute disgust beneath. And when I confronted you about the suspicious deposits last week, you looked me right in the eye and lied to my face. You chose to protect your brother-in-law's criminal enterprise because he was funding your country club lifestyle. You chose his dirty money over our family. I watched Savannah's reality completely fracture. She was cornered. Her husband, the man she had taken for granted for years, was leaving her. Her brother-in-law, the source of her unearned arrogance, was facing federal prison. Her bank accounts, the very foundation of her identity, were permanently locked. In true golden child fashion, instead of taking a single ounce of accountability for her own actions, Savannah desperately searched the yard for a scapegoat. She turned wildly toward the driveway. Our mother was still standing near the edge of the grass, her hands covering her mouth, watching the complete destruction of her two favored children with an expression of absolute suffocating horror. Savannah pointed directly at her. "It is not my fault!" Savannah shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch of pure hysteria. "Mom and Dad told me it was fine." The entire yard went dead silent. The off-duty police officer stopped moving. Trey crossed his arms, his jaw set in a hard line. Even Preston slowly raised his head from the mud, looking at Savannah in sheer disbelief. They said as long as Preston paid for the country club and kept the family status intact, we should turn a blind eye to his cheating. Savannah cried, the words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate rush to save herself. "They told me not to say anything to you, Madeline. They said it was just a phase and that I needed to protect the family reputation." The words hung in the quiet morning air, heavy and toxic. The cold, clinical detachment that had shielded me all morning instantly vanished. A new, far more dangerous kind of ice flooded my veins. The financial betrayal I had expected. The corporate sabotage I had meticulously calculated. But this was different. This was a structural familial rot that I had not fully accounted for. They had prioritized their social standing over my dignity. They had sold my humiliation for a country club membership. I slowly turned my head. I bypassed Preston. I bypassed Trey. I looked right past Savannah's weeping, pathetic form and locked my eyes directly onto my sister's face. My voice dropped to a dangerously quiet register, devoid of any warmth, any mercy, or any forgiveness. "Mom and Dad knew about Kendall." The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Savannah recoiled instantly, realizing the catastrophic mistake she had just made. She clamped both hands over her mouth, her eyes darting wildly, but the damage was already done. The truth hung in the air between us, heavy and undeniable. My own parents had known my husband was sleeping with another woman, and they had actively conspired to keep me in the dark. Trey did not say a single word. He stepped forward, placed a firm hand on the small of my back, and guided me toward his unmarked federal vehicle parked at the end of the driveway. I did not look back at Preston, who was still paralyzed in the mud, or at Savannah, who was now weeping hysterically on the ruined grass. I got into the passenger seat, my vision narrowing to a singular razor-sharp focus. Trey started the engine. "Where to?" he asked, his voice steady. "My parents' house," I replied. The drive across town took exactly 12 minutes. Neither of us spoke. The silence inside the car was absolute, thick with the shared understanding of complete familial betrayal. Trey parked the SUV aggressively against the curb in front of my parents' pristine two-story colonial home. I stepped out before he even killed the engine, my boots striking the pavement with lethal intent. Trey followed closely behind me, his federal badge still catching the light. I did not bother knocking. I did not reach for the doorbell. I raised my foot and kicked the heavy oak front door right below the brass handle. The lock shattered instantly. The heavy wood crashed violently against the interior drywall, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the quiet suburban foyer. My mother shrieked. She was sitting in the formal living room, a cup of Earl Grey tea frozen halfway to her mouth. My father jolted up from his leather recliner, the morning newspaper slipping from his grasp. They both stared at me in sheer horror as I marched into the room, Trey standing silently in the doorway, like a towering sentry blocking their only exit. "Madeline, what on earth is wrong with you?" my mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as she took in my furious expression and the splintered doorframe. "Have you lost your mind?" Savannah just confessed everything I stated. My voice was completely devoid of emotion, a flat, dead calm that immediately made the color drain from my father's face. She told me you ordered her to keep quiet. She told me you actively covered for Preston. My mother blinked rapidly, her eyes darting toward my father in a desperate search for a plausible lie. I do not know what you are talking about, she stammered, her voice pitching an octave higher. Savannah is hysterical today. You know how she exaggerates things. She is just trying to stir up drama. Do not insult my intelligence, I snapped, stepping directly into her personal space. She told me you knew about Kendall. She told me you knew my husband was sleeping with another woman, and you instructed your other daughter to turn a blind eye just to protect your precious social standing. The room went completely silent. My father looked down at his Italian loafers, entirely unwilling to meet my gaze. My mother stared at me, her chest heaving. I watched the polite maternal facade crack and fall away, revealing the cold, calculating entitlement beneath. The performance was over. So what if we knew? My mother finally snapped, her voice rising to a shrill, defiant pitch. She slammed her teacup down onto the glass coffee table, the china rattling violently. A smart woman knows how to look the other way when her husband is a provider. I stared at her, genuinely repulsed by the words coming out of her mouth. He gave you a beautiful home, my mother continued, gesturing wildly around the room. He gave you a lifestyle most women would kill for. Men have needs, Madeline. You work too much. You are too rigid. You were going to throw away our retirement fund over a little affair. Do you have any idea what a divorce would do to this family? You were going to ruin everything over your own petty jealousy. I stood completely still, letting the sheer toxicity of her justification wash over me. They had sold my dignity. They had completely compromised my marriage and my mental health, all because they were terrified of losing their financial safety net. They saw Preston as their personal ATM, and they viewed my suffering as an acceptable cost of doing business. You mean the retirement fund I fully funded? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. My mother frowned, her arrogant expression faltering. What are you talking about? Preston pays our mortgage. He set up the auto draft from his corporate account 2 years ago. He takes care of this family. I slowly unzipped the leather tote bag hanging from my shoulder. I bypassed the notarized deeds and the offshore banking ledgers reaching deep into the bottom compartment. I pulled out a thick, bright red folder. I flipped it open and tossed a stack of heavily highlighted bank statements directly onto the glass coffee table right next to her spilled tea. Preston never gave you a single dime of his own money, I stated, watching my father finally look up, his eyes widening in sudden panic. Preston was drowning in corporate debt. He could not even afford his own luxury car leases without skimming from the company. He used my executive salary from the Onyx Holdings logistics division to pay your mortgage. He routed my bonuses through a shell company so he could hand you a check every month and look like the hero. My mother stared at the bank statements. The routing numbers were clear. The deposits traced back directly to my personal corporate earnings. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had sold out her own daughter to a man who was quietly using that same daughter's money to buy their loyalty. You have been living on my paycheck for 36 months. I continued, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I paid for this house. I paid for your country club dinners. I paid for the lifestyle you were so desperate to protect that you let my husband humiliate me. Madeline. Please, my father croaked, taking a weak step forward. We did not know. We thought he was just protecting the family assets. I ignored him entirely. I reached into the pocket of my coat and pulled out a silver metal lighter. With my other hand, I picked up the original signed mortgage auto draft contract from the top of the pile. I walked past them, stepping into their pristine, custom-designed kitchen. I flicked the lighter. A bright orange flame illuminated the expensive marble countertops. I held the flame directly to the corner of the contract, watching the thick paper curl blacken and ignite. Madeline, stop, my mother screamed, rushing into the kitchen as the fire rapidly consumed the document that guaranteed her comfortable suburban life. I let the paper burn until the flames nearly licked my fingers, then dropped the blazing remains directly into the center of their spotless stainless steel sink. I watched the ashes disintegrate, washing away years of their unearned entitlement. I turned around, looking at the two people who were supposed to protect me. "You are cut off," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "Have fun paying the bank on your own." I did not wait around to watch the ashes wash down the drain. I turned on my heel and walked right out the shattered front door, leaving my mother sobbing uncontrollably over her ruined china, and my father staring blankly at the smoking stainless steel sink. Trey fell into step beside me, his massive presence serving as a silent, formidable shield against any further familial dysfunction. We got back into his unmarked federal SUV without a single backward glance. The drive into the city was a blur of neon streetlights and the rhythmic, heavy thumping of rain against the windshield. I had booked a penthouse suite at the downtown Plaza Hotel the night before, fully aware that my estate would be crawling with forensic teams and crime scene photographers for days. I needed a sanctuary, a place completely disconnected from the toxic wreckage of my past. What I did not know as I finally collapsed into the crisp white hotel sheets was that Preston was currently backed into a corner like a rabid, desperate dog. Facing 20 solid years in a federal penitentiary, his carefully constructed facade of the untouchable corporate visionary had completely evaporated. Sitting in the grim fluorescent-lit conference room of his high-priced defense attorney Preston was executing his final dirtiest trick. He had always been a coward, but he was a cornered coward with a background in logistics software and a malicious streak. Under the guise of reviewing discovery files on his attorney's encrypted tablet, Preston accessed a hidden cloud server he had maintained off the books. Using a digital backdoor he had secretly installed years ago, he forcefully bypassed the firewalls on my old personal laptop, a device I had left sitting dormant in my home office. In a matter of minutes, working with frantic, sweaty precision, he began aggressively planting a trail of fabricated emails, offshore wire transfers, and forged digital signatures. He was building a meticulous, highly detailed narrative designed to make it look like I was the brilliant criminal mastermind behind the entire Onyx Holdings tax evasion scheme. He was manufacturing a digital paper trail to prove that he was just the naive, trusting husband I had perfectly framed to take the fall. The knock on my hotel door came at exactly 7 in the morning. It was not a polite housekeeping tap. It was the heavy, uncompromising, authoritative pounding of federal law enforcement. I tightened the belt of my silk robe and swung the heavy mahogany door open. 2 federal agents in dark suits stood in the hallway, their expressions completely unreadable and rigidly professional. Behind them stood Trey, looking significantly more tense and aggressive than he had yesterday. Madeline, Trey said, his voice clipped and strictly formal. "These agents need you to come down to the federal building immediately for questioning regarding a massive overnight development in the Onyx Holdings investigation." I looked at the lead agent, a tall, severe woman with steel gray hair and zero patience. "Am I under arrest?" I asked, my voice betraying no panic. "Not at this precise moment, ma'am," she replied smoothly, her hand resting near her utility belt. "But your cooperation is mandatory. Critical new evidence has come to light, and we need you in an interrogation room right now." I nodded slowly, processing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. I looked back at Trey. "I need a lawyer." Trey stepped forward, crossing the threshold into my suite with a protective stance. "I have already formally recused myself from the active prosecution of this specific offshoot of the case. As of 5 minutes ago, I am acting as your official legal counsel. Get dressed. We are leaving." The interrogation room inside the federal building was exactly as cold and aggressively sterile as one would imagine. The walls were painted a dull, cinder-block gray. The heavy metal table was bolted directly to the scuffed linoleum floor. The air conditioning blasted at a freezing temperature, designed to make suspects physically uncomfortable. Trey sat to my right, his posture rigid, his sharp eyes tracking every single movement in the room. The steel-haired agent who introduced herself as Special Agent Miller sat directly across from us. She did not bother with pleasantries or offering me a glass of water. She opened a thick, tightly packed manila folder and slid a printed stack of digital communications and bank routing numbers aggressively across the metal table. The document stopped right in front of my folded hands. I looked down at the papers. There were printouts of emails seemingly sent from my personal account authorizing massive illegal transfers to shell companies in the Cayman Islands. There were digital memos carrying my electronic signature directing Onyx Holdings accountants to fraudulently alter the quarterly ledgers. Your husband was heavily interrogated late last night, Agent Miller stated, her voice dropping into a harsh, accusatory register that echoed off the bare walls. He claims he was entirely blind to the embezzlement. He claims you orchestrated the Cayman accounts, manipulated the logistics numbers, and deliberately engineered this entire elaborate situation to frame him and seize his corporate assets. She leaned forward, resting her elbows heavily on the table, trying to use her physical presence to intimidate me. He provided us with direct remote access to your old laptop. The forensic timestamp clearly shows these directives originated from your specific IP address, Madeline. It looks like you are the architect of this fraud, and you used federal agents to execute a personal vendetta. Trey shifted aggressively in his seat, his jaw tightening as he prepared to interject and shut down the line of questioning entirely, but I held up a hand to stop him. I did not look scared. I did not look intimidated or defensive. I looked down at the fabricated documents, and a genuine, highly amused smile broke across my face. I started laughing. It was a cold, sharp sound of pure victory that rang loudly through the sterile room. Agent Miller frowned, her brow furrowing in deep confusion at my complete lack of panic. I stopped laughing and leaned forward, bringing my face inches from hers, mirroring her exact intimidating posture. "Let me ask you a technical question, Agent Miller," I said, my voice dropping to a dead, unwavering calm. "Did he upload that evidence from the IP address ending in 88.4? The agent physically stiffened. Her eyes widened, losing their practiced interrogator glare. She looked down at her own forensic file, then back up at me, clearly shocked by my exact knowledge of the digital footprint. Yes. Agent Miller's single affirmative word hung in the freezing air of the interrogation room. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cold metal table, completely invading her space, just as she had tried to invade mine. "I am a forensic auditor, Agent Miller," I said, enunciating every syllable with crystal clear precision. "Did you honestly believe a woman who spent 3 solid years silently building an immutable blockchain ledger to trap a corporate embezzler would leave her personal laptop entirely unsecured in a home office?" Trey let out a short, sharp breath next to me, realizing exactly what I had done. "That laptop was not abandoned." I continued, my voice steady and completely commanding the room. "It was a honeypot. It was a decoy server built specifically for this exact scenario." I knew Preston was a cornered coward. I knew that the second he faced real federal prison time, his immediate instinct would be to manufacture a scapegoat. So I gave him one. Agent Miller's severe expression began to physically crack. She looked back down at the stack of fabricated evidence, the digital paper trail that had seemed so perfectly damning just moments ago. By illegally accessing that specific IP address to plant his fake emails, Preston did not frame me, I explained. Watching the dawn of comprehension wash over the veteran federal agent's face, he walked blindly into a digital tripwire. He thought he was exploiting a backdoor he had secretly installed on our home network years ago. In reality, accessing that specific backdoor triggered a self-executing script that immediately bypassed his final personal encryption layer. I reached into my bag and pulled out my secure tablet. I tapped the screen a few times, bringing up the network tracking interface, before sliding it smoothly across the table until it rested directly over Preston's fabricated documents. "Refresh your internal database, Agent Miller." She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before pulling her own federal laptop closer. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She hit the refresh key. The reflection of the screen illuminated her pale face as the data began to flood into the secure federal servers in real time. We were not looking at standard corporate skimming anymore. We were looking at thousands of deeply buried files, offshore shell companies' encrypted Cayman accounts, and massive untraceable wire transfers were populating the screen faster than she could scroll. "Look at the routing names," I instructed, my voice sharp and uncompromising. Agent Miller scrolled rapidly, her eyes widening in absolute shock. These are local political action committees. She breathed her professional detachment entirely vanishing. State representatives, city zoning commissioners, municipal safety inspectors. Preston did not just steal from his investors. I stated, delivering the final crushing blow to my ex-brother-in-law's existence. He was buying zoning permits. He was silencing municipal audits. He was paying off local politicians to keep Onyx Holdings completely unexamined and entirely above the law. He didn't just plant fake evidence on me, Agent Miller. He just handed you the key to an entire federal corruption ring. The heavy silence in the interrogation room lasted exactly 3 seconds before absolute chaos erupted. Agent Miller slammed her hand down on the desk telephone, barking urgent high-level commands to the operations floor. The dull gray walls of the federal building seemed to vibrate as the magnitude of the data breach registered across the department. Red flashing alerts lit up the glass partitions of the squad room outside our door. Agents sprinted down the hallways shouting directives as the massive scope of the bribery ring became clear. Federal judges were being woken up from their beds to fast-track a dozen new high-priority arrest warrants. Preston's petty, vindictive attempt at revenge had just triggered the largest political scandal the state had seen in a decade. Trey looked at me, a profound mixture of shock, professional awe, and intense respect etched into his features. The lab rat had not just built a cage, she had blown up the entire laboratory. Meanwhile, 20 miles away in a high-rise luxury condominium downtown, Kendall was aggressively throwing designer clothes into a Louis Vuitton suitcase. Preston's mistress was not entirely stupid. She had an alert set up on her phone for any movement in the offshore accounts she had helped Preston hide. The second my honeypot script breached his final encryption layer and dumped those files onto the Department of Justice server, Kendall's phone had started shrieking with unauthorized access warnings. She knew instantly that Preston was completely finished. There was no talking his way out of a federal corruption ring. There was no high-priced defense attorney who could save him now, and more importantly, there was no way she was going to let herself be dragged down into a federal penitentiary with him. She zipped the heavy suitcase shut, her hands trembling as she grabbed her passport and her emergency stash of cash from the wall safe. She did not bother leaving a note. She did not bother calling Preston to warn him about the impending raid. Kendall turned off her cell phone, tossed it directly into the kitchen trash can, and bolted for the door, desperately attempting to flee the country before the federal warrants hit the airport security systems. The fluorescent lights of the international terminal at Logan International Airport glared down harshly against the polished floors. Kendall pushed her oversized designer sunglasses higher up the bridge of her nose, her knuckles stark white as she gripped the thick handle of a heavy black leather duffel bag. She bypassed the standard check-in counters entirely, heading straight for the priority first-class security lane. Her flight to Dubai was scheduled to board in exactly 40 minutes. She just needed to get through this final checkpoint. She felt the heavy stacks of vacuum-sealed cash pressing against the sides of the leather bag. $50,000. It was the maximum amount she had been able to pull from her local emergency safe before bolting. The rest of the money, the millions she had helped Preston illegally siphon into their joint offshore accounts, was already fully compromised. Her smartphone had practically melted down with unauthorized access alerts. The second Madeline's hidden honeypot script breached Preston's final encryption layer and dumped those offshore files directly onto the Department of Justice servers. Kendall checked her diamond-studded watch. Her pulse pounded a frantic, erratic rhythm against her throat. Preston was an absolute fool. She had told him for months that his arrogant, sloppy accounting was going to catch up to him. She had warned him repeatedly that his quiet, compliant wife was entirely too observant. But Preston had laughed her off, completely blinded by his own towering ego. Now he was likely sitting in a federal interrogation room, completely unaware that his loyal mistress was abandoning him to rot. She stepped up to the priority podium. The TSA agent, a young man with a bored, detached expression, held out his hand. Kendall handed over her expedited boarding pass and her pristine blue passport. She offered a tight, highly practiced smile, the exact same smile she used to charm wealthy corporate clients and manipulate Preston into buying her expensive gifts. The agent swiped the passport through the electronic reader. Instead of the familiar, comforting green chime of approval, the machine let out a sharp, discordant beep. The monitor facing the agent instantly flashed a harsh, solid red. The young man stopped moving. His bored expression vanished completely. He looked at the glowing red screen, then looked slowly back up at Kendall. His hand moved subtly and deliberately toward a discreet panic button located under the counter. Kendall felt the blood drain entirely from her face. Her stomach plummeted into a cold freefall. She reached forward, her manicured fingers desperate to snatch the passport back and run. Before her fingertips could even brush the edge of the document, a heavy, authoritative voice cut sharply through the ambient noise of the crowded terminal. Going somewhere, Kendall, Trey stepped out from behind a thick concrete security pillar just 10 feet away. He was no longer wearing the casual, tactical jacket from the morning raid on Madeline's lawn. He wore a sharp, dark suit, his federal prosecutor badge clipped prominently to his belt and gleaming under the airport lights. He was not alone. Two towering U.S. Marshals flanked him, their expressions carved from stone, their hands resting cautiously near their tactical belts. Kendall froze. Her eyes darted frantically toward the exit doors, rapidly calculating the distance. But the marshals instantly closed the gap. They moved with terrifying precision, forming a solid physical barricade around her. She was completely boxed in. Trey walked slowly toward her, his commanding presence dominating the immediate space. Travelers in the nearby lines stopped and stared, pulling out their phones to record the unfolding spectacle. Did you honestly believe a high-level federal wire fraud investigation would not immediately flag the passports of every single known associate? Trey asked, his voice dripping with absolute clinical contempt. The second Madeline's decoy server dumped your joint offshore account ledgers into the federal database, your passport was flagged on every watch list in the country. We knew exactly which flight you booked before you even hailed your cab to the airport. You walked right into the net. Kendall opened her mouth to speak, to lie, to weave some desperate, charming excuse, but Trey did not give her the oxygen to form the words. He stepped right up to the podium and looked down at her. Insider trading, corporate embezzlement, and aiding in federal tax evasion. Trey listed each severe charge, hitting the air like a physical blow. That is a minimum of 15 years in a federal penitentiary. There is no leniency for the flight risk who tries to board an international plane with a bag full of undeclared cash. One of the U.S. Marshals stepped forward, firmly taking the heavy leather duffel bag from Kendall's trembling grip. He unzipped the top, revealing the neat, tightly wrapped stacks of $100 bills. He looked up at Trey and gave a single confirming nod. The reality of her situation crashed down upon Kendall, shattering her arrogant, untouchable facade into a million unrecoverable pieces. 15 years. Her youth, her beauty, her meticulously curated life of luxury, all of it was instantly vaporized. She was not flying to Dubai. She was going to be locked inside a concrete federal cell. Her legs gave out completely. She collapsed onto the polished airport tile, no longer caring who was watching or recording. Her designer sunglasses tumbled from her face and clattered against the floor. She sobbed, a loud, ugly, hyperventilating sound of pure terror that echoed through the security line. She looked up at Trey, her face slick with tears and completely ruined makeup. In a fraction of a second, she abandoned her loyalty to Preston entirely. Survival was the only metric that mattered now. I will tell you everything. Kendall screamed, her voice shrill and desperate as she clutched at the air. I was just following orders. Preston made me do it. Trey looked down at her, his expression utterly unmoved by her pathetic hysterics. We already have Preston, he stated coldly. We have the immutable ledger. We do not need your confession to bury him. Kendall shook her head violently, her eyes wide with total desperation. No. You do not have the whole picture. She scrambled forward on her knees. I have recordings. I have audio recordings of Preston and his mother hiding the physical assets. I have the tapes of them discussing exactly how to funnel the stolen money through her fake charity foundations. I will give you Beatrice. Kendall did not just sing in that federal interrogation room. She performed a complete, unredacted symphony for the Department of Justice. Sitting in the windowless security office at the airport, clutching a lukewarm cup of water and shivering in her designer travel clothes, she traded Preston's entire criminal blueprint for her own immunity. She detailed exactly how the embezzled funds were washed, explaining that the money did not just sit in the Cayman Islands. It flowed directly back into the United States through a complex web of fake philanthropic organizations. She eagerly handed over the audio files from her phone, playing crystal-clear recordings of Preston outlining the laundering strategy. And the most damning piece of audio was not Preston's voice, but the sharp, aristocratic tone of the woman who served as the chairman of those fraudulent charities, Beatrice. At 1 o'clock that afternoon, Beatrice was holding court at the Oakmont Country Club's annual spring luncheon. The dining room was a sea of pastel silk diamond tennis bracelets and generational wealth. Beatrice sat at the center table sipping a mimosa and accepting compliments on her pristine, custom-tailored Chanel suit. Resting on the empty chair beside her was a rare Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag, a status symbol that cost more than a starter home. She was completely oblivious to the fact that her son was currently locked in a federal holding cell, and his mistress had just surrendered the financial records of their entire family. The heavy oak doors of the dining room did not open politely. They were pushed wide by 6 federal agents wearing dark tactical windbreakers with FBI printed across the back in stark yellow lettering. The live string quartet in the corner abruptly stopped playing. The low hum of wealthy socialites gossiping over salmon salads died instantly. The lead agent marched directly across the plush carpet, his eyes locked on Beatrice, who lowered her champagne flute with a look of deep aristocratic offense. Beatrice Sterling, this agent announced, his voice carrying easily across the dead-silent dining room. He did not lower his volume to spare her dignity. "We have a federal warrant for your immediate arrest on charges of conspiracy to commit wire fraud and federal money laundering." Beatrice stood up, her face flushing a furious blotchy red. "How dare you interrupt this luncheon?" she hissed, looking around at her horrified friends. "Do you have any idea who I am? I demand you leave this establishment at once." The agent ignored her completely. He pulled a thick stack of folded documents from his jacket and dropped the federal subpoena directly onto her plate of half-eaten salmon. He then unclipped a heavy plastic evidence bag from his belt and snapped it open. "Because your personal assets were purchased using documented laundered corporate funds that trace back to the Onyx Holdings embezzlement scheme, they are subject to immediate federal seizure," the agent stated loudly. He reached over and grabbed the Himalayan Birkin bag from the chair. Beatrice shrieked, lunging forward to snatch it back, but a second agent firmly caught her wrist. The lead agent unceremoniously unclasped her bag, dumping its contents onto the white linen tablecloth. Lipstick, car keys, and mints clattered against the fine china. He shoved the empty bag into the plastic evidence sack. "Take off the jewelry," the agent ordered, gesturing to her diamond necklace and her vintage Cartier watch. "Now, or we will remove them for you at the precinct." Beatrice looked around the room, desperately seeking an ally, but the women at her table were actively pushing their chairs back, creating physical distance from her toxic presence. The social annihilation was absolute. Trembling with rage and humiliation, Beatrice unclasped her diamonds and dropped them into the agent's outstretched plastic bag. She was escorted out of the country club through the main dining room, stripped of her stolen armor, with the eyes of the entire local elite burning into her back. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Beatrice had posted an emergency bail bond, only to discover that every single bank account tied to her name, her charities, and her estate had been completely frozen by the Department of Justice. She was penniless. Driven by sheer, unadulterated panic, she went straight to the only person holding all the cards. "I was standing in the expansive marble lobby of Onyx Holdings, reviewing a logistical brief with my new chief operating officer, when the front glass doors slid open violently." Beatrice burst into the corporate headquarters looking completely unhinged. Her perfectly styled hair was windblown and chaotic. Her expensive Chanel jacket was deeply wrinkled, and without her jewelry or her designer bag, she looked incredibly small and fragile. She was clutching a cheap, reusable canvas grocery tote that someone had apparently handed her to carry her car keys. She spotted me near the security turnstiles and practically ran across the marble floor. "Madeline!" she gasped, her voice cracking as tears streamed down her face. She did not stop walking until she was right in front of me. Then the woman who had spent the last decade looking down her nose at me, who had called me pedestrian, who had actively conspired to hide my husband's infidelity and steal my corporate assets, collapsed. She dropped heavily to her knees on the cold marble floor, right in the middle of the crowded lobby. Employees stopped walking. Security guards froze in their tracks. "Please, Madeline." Beatrice wept, clutching her hands together in front of her chest and begging hysterically. "I am begging you. You took the house. You took the company. Do not let them take my estate. Do not let them take my foundation. I have nothing left. I am an old woman. You cannot do this to me." She reached out her shaking hands, attempting to grab the fabric of my skirt, but I stepped back smoothly, breaking the distance. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely no pity. I felt nothing but the clean, sharp satisfaction of total victory. "You once told me I would leave this family with nothing but a cheap suitcase." I stated, my voice echoing clearly through the silent, captivated lobby. I gestured to the front security desk where a dark gray, scuffed piece of luggage was resting against the counter. "I left a Samsonite by the front desk for you." I continued, my gaze boring into her terrified, tear-streaked face. "You are going to need it for prison." I did not wait for her response. I turned on my heel and walked purposefully toward the executive elevators. As the heavy steel doors began to slide shut, Beatrice let out a piercing, unhinged scream of pure despair, completely losing whatever shred of sanity she had left. Through the narrowing gap of the elevator doors, I watched two large security guards firmly grab her by the arms and begin dragging her toward the exit. The elevator began its rapid ascent to the top floor. My phone vibrated in the pocket of my blazer. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was an email from my attorney. The judge had signed the final decree. The divorce was officially finalized. The stainless steel doors of the executive elevator slid shut, sealing out the shrill, frantic screams of Beatrice Sterling as security dragged her across the marble lobby. I stood alone in the quiet, ascending car, watching the floor numbers tick upward. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A single line from my attorney illuminated the screen. The judge had signed the final decree. The divorce was officially finalized. I was no longer bound to Preston, to his toxic family, or to the suffocating life I had endured for years. I was free. The ensuing 3 weeks moved with the relentless, devastating efficiency of a controlled demolition. The Onyx Holdings scandal detonated across the national financial news cycle. Every morning, business anchors breathlessly dissected the massive web of offshore shell companies, illegal kickbacks, and political bribes that my digital honeypot had exposed. The federal task force, armed with the irrefutable data I had handed them, tore through the corporate headquarters like a hurricane. The board of directors was entirely purged. The company assets were seized. The corrupt politicians who had fed off Preston's bribery ring were resigning in disgrace or being indicted in rapid succession. The dust was finally beginning to settle, leaving nothing but scorched earth where Preston's fraudulent empire had once stood. I was not sitting idly by while the federal government dismantled his life. I had planned this execution for years, and my endgame was not merely revenge, it was restitution. I sat in a sunlit, glass-walled conference room on the top floor of a prestigious downtown law firm. Across the polished mahogany table sat a senior director from the Internal Revenue Service and my personal financial attorney. We were finalizing the paperwork for a program very few outside the forensic accounting world truly understood. When I bypassed Preston's firewall and delivered his unencrypted offshore ledgers to the Department of Justice, I did not just do it as an aggrieved wife. I filed a formal submission under the IRS Whistleblower Informant Program. By law, if an individual provides actionable concrete evidence that leads to the successful collection of massive tax underpayments, that individual is entitled to a mandatory percentage of the recovered funds. My immutable blockchain ledger had mapped out exactly where Preston had buried his illicit fortune. The federal agents did not have to search for the money. They simply had to follow the bright red digital arrows I had painted for them. They recovered exactly $40 million in unpaid taxes, hidden assets, and illegal corporate dividends. Because my evidence was flawless, comprehensive, and directly resulted in the recovery, the IRS awarded me the maximum legal bounty of 30%. The senior director pushed a heavy watermarked folder across the table. I signed my name on the final line with a smooth, steady stroke of a fountain pen. In a matter of hours, a direct wire transfer of $12 million would hit my newly established entirely private banking accounts. It was completely tax-free, entirely legal, and utterly untouchable by any member of the Sterling family. I had not just destroyed my ex-husband, I had monetized his destruction. 2 days later, I walked through the heavy double doors of the federal courthouse for Preston's official sentencing hearing. The courtroom was packed with journalists, defrauded investors, and curious onlookers. I bypassed the crowded back rows and took my seat in the front gallery, crossing my legs and resting my hands in my lap. I wore a pristine sharp white suit, a stark deliberate contrast to the somber environment. A heavy side door opened and the bailiff led Preston into the room. The breath caught in the throats of several reporters behind me. The transformation was shocking. Gone was the arrogant, impeccably groomed chief executive officer who used to sneer at me across our granite kitchen island. Preston was wearing a standard-issue bright orange prison jumpsuit. His wrists were shackled to a chain around his waist. His feet shuffled heavily against the floor due to the iron cuffs around his ankles. He had lost weight in the holding center, and his skin had taken on a sickly gray pallor. The supreme confidence that had always shielded him like a force field was completely gone. He looked small, hollow, and utterly broken. He took his seat beside his court-appointed public defender. His expensive legal team had abandoned him the moment his assets were frozen. As he sat down, he slowly turned his head and looked out into the gallery. His eyes met mine. I did not glare. I did not sneer. I simply looked back at him with the cold, detached expression of a woman examining a stranger. He saw the white suit. He saw the absolute freedom in my posture. The reality of his catastrophic failure seemed to hit him all over again. He dropped his gaze to his shackled hands, unable to maintain eye contact with the woman who had meticulously orchestrated his downfall. The federal judge did not waste time with lengthy speeches. Given the staggering scope of the fraud, the attempted destruction of evidence, and the complete lack of remorse displayed prior to his arrest, the sentence was severe and uncompromising. 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. The gavel slammed down, echoing like a gunshot through the silent courtroom. Preston flinched, his shoulders curling inward, as the bailiff grabbed his arm and hauled him away to begin his 2 decades of confinement. I stood up, smoothed the lapels of my white jacket, and walked out of the courtroom. The afternoon sun felt brilliantly warm as I stepped out onto the wide stone steps of the courthouse plaza. The city hummed with life, completely indifferent to the man who had just lost his freedom inside the concrete walls behind me. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone, intending to text Trey to confirm the sentencing. The screen was lit up with a barrage of missed calls and notifications. I tapped the voicemail icon and lifted the phone to my ear. The first message was from my father. His voice was trembling, stripped of all the patriarchal authority he had always wielded over me. "Madeline, please." He choked out the sound of genuine panic bleeding through the speaker. "You have to answer the phone. The bank just sent a sheriff to the house. They are changing the locks." The second message was from my mother. She was openly sobbing, a harsh, ugly sound that lacked all of her usual country club refinement. "Madeline, where are you?" The auto draft stopped. "They are taking the house. They are taking everything. We have absolutely zero savings. You cannot leave us like this. Please, Madeline, I am your mother. We will do anything you want. Just give us an advance. Just pay the arrears." The final message was from my sister. Savannah was hyperventilating, her words tumbling over each other in a desperate, pathetic rush. "Maddie, please, I have nowhere to go. My credit cards are all declining. Mom and Dad are putting their luggage in the driveway. The neighbors are watching. Please, Maddie. I am so sorry about Preston." I am so sorry about everything. You are rich now. I saw it on the news. You got millions from the government. You have to help us. We are family. We have absolutely nothing. I stood on the courthouse steps, listening to the absolute ruin of the people who had sold my dignity for a comfortable suburban mortgage. They had bled me dry for years, assuming I would always be the quiet, obedient workhorse, financing their entitlement. Now the money was gone, the house was repossessed, and they were standing on the curb with nowhere to turn. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. I deleted all 3 voicemails with a single decisive swipe of my thumb. Then I blocked their numbers. I slipped the phone back into my purse, adjusted my sunglasses against the bright afternoon glare, and walked down the steps to hail a cab. The yellow taxi pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the chaotic rhythm of the city. I sank back against the worn leather seat, letting the steady hum of the tires soothe my frayed nerves. I pulled my phone from my purse one last time. The screen was dark, completely silent. I had deleted the pathetic, groveling voicemails from my parents in Savannah without listening past the first few desperate pleas. I blocked their numbers permanently, severing the final toxic threads that tied me to a family who had only ever viewed me as an endless line of credit. They had made their choices, consistently sacrificing my dignity to maintain their country club facade. Now they were experiencing the brutal, uncompromising reality of consequences. I dropped the phone back into my bag. I felt no guilt, no remorse, and absolutely no hesitation. I felt nothing but a clean, sweeping sense of absolute freedom. 30 minutes later, the cab dropped me off in front of an exclusive French bistro in the heart of the culinary district. The maitre d' recognized me instantly, offering a polite nod before escorting me to a secluded corner booth bathed in soft, natural light. Trey was already waiting. He stood as I approached, a genuine, relaxed smile transforming his features. He looked completely different from the tense, exhausted man I had conspired with in the shadows of my former life. The heavy bags under his eyes were gone, replaced by a sharp, focused energy. "You look like a woman who just won a major war," Trey said, pulling out my chair. "I feel like one," I replied, taking my seat and unfolding the crisp linen napkin. "How did your final hearing go?" Trey's smile widened, reaching his eyes. "The ink is officially dry. Savannah practically surrendered the moment her platinum credit card started declining. Once the bank moved to foreclose on their precious estate, her only priority was salvaging whatever shred of social status she had left. She did not even fight for custody. She was too busy packing whatever designer bags the federal agents had not already seized." He leaned back as the waiter approached, smoothly ordering a bottle of their best vintage champagne. "I have full primary custody of Chloe Trey," continued, his voice thick with profound relief. "Savannah gets supervised visits every other weekend, but she has already missed the first one to attend a high-end liquidation sale. Chloe and I are moving into a new townhome next week. A completely fresh start. No toxic influences, no superficial family drama, and absolutely no sterling family interference. Just us." The waiter arrived, pouring the pale, sparkling liquid into 2 crystal flutes. I raised my glass, watching the bubbles rise rapidly to the surface. We had both been the scapegoats, the collateral damage in the Sterling family's relentless pursuit of power and vanity. We had both been drastically underestimated. "To cutting out the rot," I said, holding my glass steady. Trey tapped his crystal flute against mine with a satisfying, resonant chime. "To real family." 6 months later, the crisp autumn wind whipped through the financial district, scattering amber leaves across the pavement. I stood on the sidewalk, a steaming cup of artisan coffee in my hand, looking up at the sleek, glass-paneled high-rise that dominated the skyline. It was exactly 3 blocks away from the building where Preston had once ruled his fraudulent empire. A team of specialized installation workers was carefully lowering a massive brushed steel sign into place above the main entrance. I watched with quiet satisfaction as the bold, modern lettering locked perfectly into its heavy brackets. Onyx Forensic Accounting and Auditing. I had reclaimed the name. I had taken the very word Preston used to build his criminal enterprise and repurposed it into a weapon for justice. I owned the entire 12th floor. My hand-picked team consisted of the brightest, most ruthless financial investigators, former IRS agents, and cybersecurity experts in the country. We specialized in uncovering hidden assets, tracing laundered money, and dismantling financial abuse within high-net-worth divorces. We were the nightmare every corrupt spouse feared. I walked through the revolving glass doors, the heels of my designer pumps clicking sharply against the polished granite lobby. The security guard nodded respectfully, already knowing my face and my schedule. I stepped into my private elevator and swiped my executive access card, riding up to my new domain. The 12th floor was a masterpiece of modern, efficient design. Bright, open-concept workspaces, floor-to-ceiling windows, flooding the rooms with natural light, and a dedicated secure server room that rivaled federal intelligence facilities. My executive assistant, a sharp, highly organized young man named David, looked up the moment I approached the main reception desk. "Good morning, Madeline," David said, handing me a thick daily briefing folder. "Your 10 o'clock is waiting in your office. She is a walk-in, but she said it was an absolute emergency. I vetted her intake forms and ran a preliminary background check. You are going to want to take this one personally." I walked down the quiet, carpeted corridor and pushed open the heavy mahogany doors to my private office. Sitting on the edge of the plush leather guest chair was a young woman. She looked utterly terrified. Her hands shook violently as she clutched a thick, disorganized stack of bank statements, tax returns, and crumpled wire transfer receipts. She wore a designer trench coat that was clearly a season out of date, and I recognized the frantic, trapped look in her eyes immediately. It was the exact same look I used to see staring back at me in the mirror. She jumped slightly, her shoulders tensing as I closed the heavy door behind me. "I am so sorry to show up without an appointment," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper, thick with unshed tears. "My husband told me we are completely broke. He said if I try to leave him, he will make sure I get absolutely nothing. But I found these papers hidden in the lining of his golf bag. I do not understand what I'm looking at, but I know he is lying to me. I just know it." She looked down at the chaotic pile of documents resting in her lap, a tear finally spilling over her eyelashes. "Everyone tells me I am crazy. His family, my family. They say I should just be grateful he provides for me. I have nowhere else to go. I have no one to help me." I walked around my massive mahogany desk and took my seat in the high-backed leather chair. I folded my hands together, looking at the frightened, isolated woman who was standing exactly where I had stood not so long ago. I saw her desperation, her fear, and her profound exhaustion. But beneath all of that, I saw her untapped strength. I offered her a calm, unwavering smile. "Take a breath," I said, my voice steady and commanding, filling the quiet room with absolute certainty. "You are in the right place. Hand me the papers. Let us get everything that belongs to you." The ultimate lesson from Madeline's journey is that true security and self-worth are never derived from those who exploit you. By shedding the toxic weight of her manipulative family and deceitful husband, she discovered her perceived vulnerability was actually her strongest weapon. Reclaiming her power did not just bring personal justice. It allowed her to transform trauma into a shield for others facing financial abuse. Never let anyone convince you that your compliance is your only value. Share your own story of reclaiming your independence and taking back your power today, and let us know in the comments below.